Okay, welcome back to week 7, American Literature 4. And today we're going to be going over our readings. The first one is After 20 Years by O. Henry. And then we're going to talk about Hector's Shoes by Nicholas Mohr. You can see by the picture in the middle, a dedication, kind of graffiti painting was created for her contributions to Nuyorican literature, and then Piri Thomas's Amigo Brothers. Okay, so let's start off with After 20 Years by O. Henry. And I really kind of like the way that he started off the story. And it goes like this. The cop moved along the street, looking strong and important. This was the way he always moved. He was not thinking of how he looked. There were few people on the street to see him. It was only about 10 o'clock at night, but it was cold, and there was wind and a little rain in it. He stopped at doors as he walked along, trying each door to be sure that it was closed for the night. Now and then he turned and looked up and down the street. He was a fine-looking cop, watchful, guarding the police. People in this part of the city went home early. Now and then you might see lights of a shop or of a small restaurant, but most of the doors belonged to businesses, places that had been closed hours ago. So he tries to set the scene of the policeman's beat, his nightly walk that he's assigned. And the story was written in 1906. So at the time, New York City had a population of about 2 million people. So today it's over 10 million. The neighborhoods, or the boroughs, they're called boroughs in New York. It's from a Dutch phrase. There were only 3. And you have your city, but there's like a sharp contrasting line that's drawn. City, streets, buildings, bam, you're in the middle of farmland. It was that clear cut geography. There were no suburbs like we know today. So try to put the picture together of 1906 in New York. There were established police force by that time. They modeled themselves after the police in London, a municipal police force. So why are policemen called cops? So in London, the policemen eventually had uniforms, and as part of the uniform, they had a badge that they would wear that said, London Police, Metropolitan Police. But the badge was made of copper. So that's how the nickname cops evolved to today. And here again, I mean, this story was written 120 years ago, and we're still using phrases that are that old in our vocabulary today. Okay, so like I say, there's about 2 million people, a lot smaller than the New York City of today. A lot of trees and parks. There were trees along the the sidewalks. There were the beginnings of gangs, mostly Irish and German. They were the immigrants of the day. There was electricity. They had electric lights. There were telephones. Not everybody had one, but there were telephones. And the streets had automobiles. Those old, clunky, old automobiles. Some of them were actually electric. And it was becoming a problem. Cars were becoming a problem. Of course, not everybody had cars. It was only the kind of rich and famous that could afford them. Excuse me. They were out of the price range of the usual everyday person. And so the there were no traffic lights. There were no traffic stops. The police did not have cars. They did have motorcycles. The first fatality connected to an automobile was maybe 1905. Some man was stepping off a trolley car and got hit by an automobile. Cars could only go about 20 miles an hour, maybe. But they were weaving in and out of horse-drawn carriages and trolley cars and people walking across the street. There were no pedestrian crossings. I mean, it was just a complete madhouse. A couple of years after the story is written, the police finally do get a car, mostly for the police commissioner. Okay, so that kind of sets the scene here. It's more of a friendly neighborhood policeman type of thing. As described in the beginning of the story, we see that the policeman is checking the doors to make sure they're locked on the businesses. And if they saw a light on in one of these office buildings, they'd call the owner and say, "Hey, what's going on? You got a light on upstairs. Maybe we should go check it out." So that's basically the scene that we're opening up with in after 20 years with O. Henry. Okay, so some of the themes in this story, of course, the most obvious is friendship between Bob and Jimmy Wells. But another possible lesson could be duty versus relation. Now, Jimmy Wells and Bob had been friends for many years, grew up together. Does Jimmy turn his friend in to be arrested? It's a personal moral dilemma that he must make a decision on. And again, in the end of the story, we see that duty triumphs over friendship. Another lesson might be is that Bob has become an habitual criminal. So our story starts off. Jimmy Wells and Bob are at a restaurant. They're young, starting out in their adult life. Bob is going out west to seek his fame and fortune. Jimmy loves New York City. He doesn't want to leave. He's going to stay there. He tells Bob that he works for the city, which is true. He doesn't really go into details. Okay, but Bob has become a criminal out west as a way to make his fortune. And even though out west at the time was a series of little small towns, people knew each other. You're a stranger coming into town. People want to know where you came from, what you did. Word gets passed around town to town. Now we've got, some criminal elements moving around, and so people are suspicious. Bob has to move from town to town to kind of keep his past from being recognized. So it's not an easy life. I guess you could probably say that Bob is kind of living the life like a Bonnie and Clyde type of existence, having to steal and rob to pay for groceries and housing and travel, and it just compounds itself over time, and there's no escape. So the two young boys at the beginning of our story promise that in 20 years' time they will meet again at the restaurant and share their life experience. So Bob shows up, and the restaurant that they were meeting in 20 years ago had become a hardware store. And we don't know it at the time, but Jimmy Wells is the policeman that is introduced in the story, and he's there on time too. But Bob doesn't recognize him. But Jimmy Wells recognizes Bob from wanted posters, and they had been tipped off by the Chicago Police Department that Bob was going to be in town and keep an eye out for him. So the dilemma of duty versus relation for Jimmy Wells is kind of out of his hands at this time. Not only he, but others in the police department knew that Jimmy Wells was going to be in town, so it'd be kind of hard for him to let his friend go to give him a pass. And so he's kind of really stuck with having to arrest him. And we don't really get the full story of Bob and his past until kind of the end, of the story. So I kind of like this really short, quick story of O. Henry's. It's the moral lesson is that we should perform our duty with full honesty and sincerity, as difficult as it can be in certain times. So that's our story after 20 years by O. Henry. Okay, so our second story is Shoes for Hector by Nicholas Mohr. And the story was written in 1973, New York City. So this is kind of the highlighted times of Puerto Rican immigration into New York City. So the backdrop history goes something like this. America and Spain had a war over a ship that blew up in Havana, Cuba, and America wins the war, and as a prize, uh, Puerto Rico, along with parts of Cuba and other Caribbean islands, become the possession of the United States. So shortly thereafter, the citizens of Puerto Rico are allowed free passage between the island and the United States, and many of them immigrated to USA, mostly settling in New York City. And of course, they create their own neighborhood. Again, this has some positive aspects. You get to be with like-minded, like-cultured, and linguistic people. And again, the negative factor is that you could stay there your whole life and never really integrate into the American culture or society. So our story setting is in Hector's parents' apartment in New York City. And Hector's a smart boy. He's the class valedictorian. He's going to graduate from high school. And he has to make a speech at the graduation. So his parents promise to buy him new clothes so that he looks really good for his speech and his graduation. And they were able to buy him a suit. Now, they kind of ran out of money. Work is getting tight for Hector's dad. It sounds like he's a laborer, maybe in construction. And those jobs are not always steady. You have a building project, the project gets finished, people get laid off, and you wait for the next big project to come along to get the next job. And you could be laid off for several weeks, a month, maybe only a few days. You never know. So that's the financial situation of Hector's family. And they run out of money, but they want to have a party after the graduation for the relatives and neighbors to celebrate Hector's graduation. So Hector finds out that he's got the suit, but no shoes. And his uncle, Uncle Luis, has offered to give Hector some new shoes that he has recently bought. But the problem is that the shoes don't match the suit. They're orange in color. They have pointed tips to them. They're really old man shoes. I mean, it'd be like wearing your grandfather's shoes to your graduation. And Hector's worried about what people will say or think about his shoes. And, you know, a typical teenager, you're going to stay up with the fashion of the day. You definitely don't want to wear grandpa's shoes anywhere. Nothing's changed. So he gets into kind of an argument with his parents about it. His mother kind of talks him into accepting the shoes and He does wear them. He goes to the graduation. He gets a check for, I think, $25 as a graduation valedictorian prize. So he does good with that. I believe he gets a watch too as well. And he is really worried about what his friends might say about his old, old guy shoes. And what happens? Nothing. Nothing happens. Nobody sees them. Nobody notices them. All his argument, his worry, his frustration is for naught. So he graduates. He goes back home. They have the party. There's a little, I would say, a little Romeo and Juliet in the story. He's got the favorite girl that he likes that shows up. But the first thing he does when he gets home is he takes off the shoes and puts on his own beat up old sneakers. So I guess the moral of the story is don't worry so much about what you think people might say or do in relation to your clothes. 20 years from now, nobody's going to remember what you wore. They're going to remember how you acted. Okay. So this is just a very typical teenage dilemma situation. And a quick read. But it wouldn't really matter that this is a Nuyorican story. This story could take place anywhere, at any time. It's really dealing with adolescents and teenagers and how they think, that sort of thing. So that's a quick summary of Shoes for Hector by Nicholas Mohr. Okay, so our third story is Amigo Brothers by Piri Thomas. It's written in 1978 in the Lower East Side of New York City. And this is one of the main areas of the Nuyorican literature. Our story has two main characters, Antonio and Felix, and they're both young teenage boys who have taken up the sport of boxing as a way of staying out of gangs and drugs and crime and all of those negative factors that are part of the immigrant communities in poverty situation. So they're doing something really positive with their lives at this point, and they really enjoy the sport of boxing. It's become very important in their life. They're kind of walking encyclopedias of boxing, who the famous boxers are, what their moves are, their stances, their styles. They know all of it. They are quite good at their chosen sport. So good, in fact, that they are amateurs and they're going to compete in the Golden Glove competition, which will allow them to gain a professional status for whomever wins. Now, once you gain professional status, you're allowed to make money as an occupation and a job for your sport. It would be like becoming a professional baseball or a basketball player. So they have worked together for many years, training. Um, they are of different physical stature. One is tall and lanky, the other short and muscular. Uh, they go through the many steps of competitions to finally be part of the Golden Glove competition. It's their night to challenge. They have to actually challenge each other. It's kept them up late at night, worrying not only about the fight, but more importantly about their friendship. Uh, this could be a make it or break it deal for them. Only one winner. So the fight starts. They battle it out. They're serious. They're not giving up an inch. They're really going at it, at each other. It's the final round. There's no TKO, no technical knockout. Uh, it's left up to the judges to decide who the winner is going to be. They embrace each other in the center of the ring. The judges are deliberating to make a decision, and they both leave. They both leave because they know they've done their best. It doesn't really matter who wins. Um, their friendship is more important at the end of the day than the actual award. So, um, some of the themes are positivity. Now, our author, as we've said before, did take the wrong path when he was young, got involved with gangs, drugs, spent time in prison for crime, turns himself around, uh, goes on a lecture circuit around the world, encouraging youth to stay away from those negative factors. So, in the story, I think Felix is challenged to join a gang. They're going to rough him up if he decides he doesn't want to be part of the gang, but he shows him some of his boxing moves, and they say, well, no, this isn't going to go easy, so forget it. So Felix avoids the gangs. Another theme may be purity of sports or good sportsmanship. The story suggests that the sportsmanlike behavior of the boys have learned while training to be boxers has helped them to become remarkable. They fight each other not out of hatred or even the desire to win, but rather for the love of competition. At the end of the fight, the boys are triumphant and happy for each, no matter who wins, because they have tried their best and survived. So, again, this is Piri Thomas. He is actually extending part of his own self and personality into the story and creating a positive alternative for young boys in poverty-stricken neighborhoods to make better choices. So that's our little story on Amigo Brothers. So something new added to our uh, report for today is something that happened about a week ago. Is an American poetess and essayist, Louise Glück, was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. She is from New York City. She was born in 1943. Her ancestry is Russian and Hungarian Jewish. Her grandparents left Europe in the early days. Her and they owned a like a little grocery store in New York. And her father had an ambition to be a writer, and but he was an inventor. He invented this little tool called an X-Acto knife, and it's a knife that's has a little razor blade inside. A lot of artists use these, and carpenters use them. It became popular probably within the last 30 years as a tool, and I guess he made some serious money through his invention. Um, she does go to college in New York. Her mother was a graduate of Wellesley College, and her mother's major was Greek mythology and classic stories. So this was a real influence on Louisa's writing style. She seems to add a lot of mythology and classic literature in her writings. So she does go to college. I don't think she actually graduated. Um, I guess she suffered from a something called anorexia, which is more of a kind of a psychosomatic disease where you worry about your weight to the point where you don't eat and you become really thin, unhealthily thin. She suffered with that when she was younger. Um, so I'm going to read one of her poems. It's called The Red Poppy. And a poppy is a red flower. It was used as a symbol by the Greeks. It has something to do with death and dying and sleep. And it's a symbol that England and America share for different military holidays. It's usually worn on the lapel. It's also in the wreaths that are made that are placed on the grave sites of unknown soldiers during the military holidays. The one we use it for is called Memorial Day. That's usually in May. Okay, so the poem goes like this. The red poppy. The great thing is not having a mind, feelings. Oh, I have those. They govern me. I have a Lord in heaven called the Sun, and open for him, showing him the fire of my own heart. Fire like the presence. What could glory be if not a heart? Oh, my brothers and sisters, Were you like me once long ago, before you were human? Did you permit yourselves to open once, who would never open again? Because in truth, I am speaking now, the way you do. I speak because I'm shattered. So the poem is interesting because it seemed to have been written in the perspective of a flower, a red poppy. It talks about before, when I was a flower and then became human. Uh, thinks of humans rather than what a human thinks of a puppy. The puppy seems to think its own mind, like when it says, "Oh, my brothers and sisters, were you like me once?" The puppy seems to think that humans are closed off, not able to show the fire of their own hearts. The last line, "I speak because I am shattered," almost seems like the poppy is trying to take on human emotion, highlighting the aspects that can happen in human life. So that's just a taste of Louise Glück's poetry. And if you want to add this in as an option for reflections and do a little research on Louise Glück's work, that would be fine also. Okay, so that's our little story today about the newly awarded Nobel Prize in Literature from one of our New York City poetresses. Okay, so our next story is called West Side Story, and it's actually a different kind of reading than what we've been doing thus far. This is a script from a theatrical musical production, and the PDF that I've sent you is 120 pages long. So, do you have to read the entire script? No. What I'd like you to do is to randomly choose 10 pages from the script to read. And you can use any part of this little segment of the lecture in all of the different media that we're going to talk about today as your reflection piece. So again, the script is 120 pages. Choose 10 pages. Just kind of scroll through it. Do a compare contrast to regular prose. And we'll talk about that for a minute. So basically the stories that we've read so far are written either poetry, maybe music lyrics, an essay, kind of a little sermon in a poetic form, or regular fictional short story text. Now, in those short story texts, the author has to provide all of the intricate descriptive detail, setting, place, clothes, mood. All of those things have to be done with one tool, words. Now, in reading a script, the script really focuses on dialogue. You've noticed in our prose readings, the dialogues are very short, if any at all. Now, in the script, it's all dialogue with side notes, possibly how the theater background would be structured. The action takes place in this particular West Side Story through a musical form, dance, acting on the stage, that sort of thing. Now, you can see the total difference in the readings of these two different types of literature. So that's really what the lesson is about, is to compare and contrast those two different kinds of written textual materials. See the difference. If you've never read a script before, here's a chance to take a look at one. Okay, so that starts off the assignment. And again, there are other parts of this little lesson here today. Pictorial, photographs, things like that, that it will be added into the reading assignment. So again, 10 pages, scroll through it. If you've never seen a musical, sheet music before with lyrics, here's your chance to take a look at that and how that plays into the story as a whole. Okay, so West Side Story, so well known. Everybody in America knows about this story, and you should too. So it's based directly on Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. And a lesser known fact about Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet is he actually gets the story from a poem that is written almost 30 years earlier by a poet named Arthur Brooke. And the title of the poem is called The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet. So actually Shakespeare kind of rewrites this poem into his theater production, Romeo and Juliet. And the story, West Side Story, follows Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet story almost to the letter. Spoiler alert here. The major difference is that Juliet does not die in the end of the story, West Side Story. Okay, so that's one of the big differences. The themes are basically about the same. A few added theme topics. But the themes are love, loyalty, revenge, society and class, youth, and race. The message of West Side Story is a plea for racial tolerance. During this time, there were racial tensions from many different groups in America. So the story, West Side Story, revolves around two main characters, Romeo and Juliet, Tony and Maria, and two rival gangs, the Jets and the Sharks, the Montagues and the Capulets. And it digs deep into social issues that are still resonate today. So let's take a little social analysis of gangs. What are gangs all about? Why do we have them? So the cause of gangs are multifold. Family breakdown, uh, poverty, poor housing, addictions, drug, alcohol, failure in education, crime, violence, unemployment. These are all the social aspects that contribute to the formation of gangs. Now, the gangs of the 1950s, when this story takes place, were basically about turf, slang expression meaning your property, where you live, your neighborhood, and protecting and keeping outsiders out of your turf. And the other reason for these gang fights are girls. Like, there's not enough girls in the world. You have to go cause trouble in your neighborhood for their girls. Okay, so drugs were not a big part of these gangs in the 50s in New York. These gangs were really about, again, protecting their turf, their property, but they were about fighting each other, fighting for your turf, keeping the other guy out of your neighborhood. Okay. And these fights were called a rumble. And actually, the gangs were made up of young kids between the ages of, let's say, 12 and 19. They were broken down by racial groups. In the city of New York, you had African Americans, Puerto Ricans, Irish, German, other different European groups, each locked in their own separate neighborhood. We talked about the positive aspects of that. Well, this is one of the negative things that happens as a result of these enclaves of, say, ethnic and racial groupings. So in 1950s, there were about 6,000 gang members throughout the city in many different gangs. Again, drugs were not a big part of gangs because gangs were meant to be fought. If you're addicted to drugs, you're not a good fighter. And the gangs would often chastise their group members who got involved in drugs and eventually get rid of them because they couldn't fight. Okay, so gangs were broken down into, there would be like a group leader, a president, or maybe a warlord, and you'd have a vice president or vice warlord. And these gangs would meet with their rival gangs in a neutral territory to plan their rumbles. And the rumble could take weeks to plan. Time, location, dates. Well, what kind of rumble is it going to be? Are weapons allowed? how many people are going to be fighting at one time, all of those sorts of things. So usually the rumble would be between 20 and 50 gang members fighting an opposing force of 20 to 50 rival gang members, and would often be in a park or schoolyard. They didn't last very long, mostly just a few minutes at most, but it would result in broken bones and unconscious victims and sometimes even death. So that kind of sets the social background of New York at the time of West Side Story. So West Side Story was originally going to be called East Side Story, and it was first conceived as a theatrical show in 1949 by Robbins, Bernstein, and Lawrence. And it was going to be set in the east side of Manhattan. They originally planned the two rival gangs were going to be Catholic and Jewish. They tried to sell this idea to promoters and backers, and the money guys said, well, not so interesting. We're going to take a pass. So they had real difficulty getting the financial backing to do this theatrical production. But the news and history intervenes. And in 1955, this is clearly 6 years later, teenage Latin gang violence in Los Angeles made the news. And so Lawrence and Bernstein and Robbins changed the idea to involve a conflict involving Puerto Rican gangs and a white gang in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And at once the project took off. Bernstein said, suddenly it all springs to life. I hear the rhythms, the pulses, and most of all, I can feel the form. So this story finally takes off. And this is the theater production comes first. Lots of rewrites, lots of changes. The movie comes out a few years later. Again, the cast of the characters, the leader of the Puerto Rican gang in the movie is actually Greek. Maria, the Juliet of our story, from the Puerto Rican gang, is actually Ukrainian. Lots of infighting between the actors and actresses. They're young, different personality types. It becomes complete chaos. They have a budget. The budget severely winds out of control, way beyond the expectations financially of the backers. It's too late. You're deep into the project. They have to push it forward. The movie and the theater production are really breaking groundwork and incorporating social issues into the art form. This had not been done before. It was a very risky venture. Nevertheless, even the critics thought this was doomed to failure. However, to the public, it became a smash hit. It earned millions of dollars, became quite the financial success. The story, even though it's more than 60 years old now, is still relevant today. Now, within the movie, again, basically follows the Romeo and Juliet theme and the theater production. There's a lot of song and dance, which was totally new, and especially in terms of gangs. But we see this again later with Michael Jackson and some of his music videos. They actually did hire some local gang members to kind of keep people away from the sets and the filming. Bad idea. Violence erupts. Doesn't work well. Police get involved. It gets really messy. So, some of the backdrop to the film and to the theater production. Everybody knows this. It has been used in everything from TV commercials to magazine commercials, still used today, still referred to today. So basically, this part of the lesson in reading is to just give you a quick background of this phenomena, West Side Story. Okay, so one of the songs that are within the musical production of West Side Story is called America. And this connects right back to our Nuyorican stories, Hector's Shoes, and our other story, Amigo Brothers, where we are specifically talking about the cultural contrast of Puerto Ricans living in New York. And it really sums up that culture clash really nicely. Again, the Puerto Ricans from the island of Puerto Rico think that the Puerto Ricans who live in America have lost some of their cultural value. The Puerto Ricans living in America are torn between these two geographic locations. So, unfortunately, with YouTube, I cannot put the song on a slide. So you'll have to listen to that, and it'll be in the description box below. Okay, so our next piece is a little off the menu, but I thought this is quite relevant to our story, West Side Story. It's kind of the aftermath of our story. So it's a song called Society's Child, written by New Yorker Janice Ian. Janice is born and raised in a small farming community in northern New Jersey, still within our geographic area of New Netherlands. And The demographic makeup of her community is predominantly African American, and she is one of the few white students in her high school. So the song is written about a boy and girl, African American male and white female, who start dating. And even the teachers at school, the neighbors, everybody, the family especially, is really up in arms over this um, intercultural, interracial relationship. So the backdrop to this story is this is not stated as autobiographical. It's merely from her interviews about the song. She says that it was an observation that she made. She says, I saw it from both ends. I was seeing it from the end of all the civil rights stuff on television and radio, of white parents being incensed when their daughters would date black men. And I saw it around me when black parents were worried about their sons and daughters dating white girls or boys. I don't think I knew where I was going when I started it, but when I hit the second line, face is clean and shining black as night, it was obvious where the song was going. I don't think I made a conscious decision to have the girl cop out in the end. It just seemed like that would be the logical thing at my age. Because how can you buck school and society and your parents and make yourself an outcast forever? Okay, so the story goes the boy and girl are dating, parents are all up in arms, both sides, both ways. Even the teachers and their friends at school are saying, hey, what are you doing? You shouldn't be doing this. Stick with your own kind. Stay with your own kind. So this is a theme again. West Side Story, stay with your own kind, don't go outside the group, that sort of thing. So the song was basically paid for by a recording company that was looking for a loss, a tax write-off. They said, oh, this song will never see the light of day. We'll just record it. It'll fail. We can write some money off on our taxes. Well, the song is picked up by a couple of radio stations in New York and is played a couple times an hour. And it becomes a hit. Eventually, it makes its way across to the West Coast. It's played on radio stations there. So it's not just a local hit anymore. It becomes a national hit. A radio station in Georgia plays the song a few times. The local residents get all twisted and bent out of shape about it, and they burn the radio station down to the ground. A Boston newspaper reporter for the Boston Herald, the big newspaper at the time, was fired for writing about the song. So the song swirls in controversy right from the very beginning. The topic, interracial marriage at the time, was illegal in 34 states in the United States. And people were arrested and either put in jail or fined or ostracized in some way. These were big crimes, a felony crime, not just some, jaywalking ticket. They were serious crimes back in the day of getting married to someone outside your race. And finally, the Supreme Court had to say, hey, this is ridiculous. People can marry whoever they want at the time. So Janice Ian was really breaking ground with her first hit, Society's Child. And when I was 16, that was a long, long, long time ago, my aunt, who was from Massachusetts, was part of the phenomena of girls, mostly girls, coming right out of high school or college, that wanted to get out of these small little cutesy New England towns and go where all the action was, and that was New York City. And thousands of girls left the countryside or these small towns of suburbia looking for excitement and the lights and action and fun of New York City. And she goes there. She had a college degree. She worked for a school system as a dietitian. And she met someone and they got married. So she came up to visit the family. I'm 16 years old at the time. And she invites me to go to New York City to kind of see what's going on. And I hadn't been very far at that time. So I found it really exciting. I kind of liked it. So took me to all the famous restaurants, of course, the landmarks, all the sightseeing places, all of that sort of stuff. But she said, hey, there is this new singer, very popular now in New York. Her name is Janice Ian, and she's going to be playing at a club in Greenwich Village called the Bitter End tomorrow night. So we're going to go see her perform. So I had never heard of Janice Ian, Society's Child, or any of it. So we go, and the place, the Bitter End, was a nightclub, and it was kind of a leftover from the 50s beatnik days when poets would go kind of hang out, drink coffee, recite poetry, or have philosophical discussions in these kind of little teeny tiny little coffee houses. So we go to the Bitter End, and it's really teeny, tiny little place, maybe just as big as a couple of college classrooms. And that's about it. And Janice Ian comes on stage and she sings from her album, Society's Child. And I became an instant fan. And so I remember when this album really kind of took off in New York and became a national hit. Okay, so our last literary piece today, again off the menu, comes from poetress Emma Lazarus. And she's born in 1849 and passes away in 1887, born and raised in New York. Although her family history is really interesting in that her family's residence or immigration to America uh, goes back to that early Dutch time. Now, again, the Dutch were very tolerant of different ethnic groups and religion. New York becomes a haven for uh, people that are being persecuted for one reason or another throughout the world, as a place, a safe haven to go to. And this is the story of Emma Lazarus' family. Uh, they originally were uh, Jewish from Portugal, and they had left Portugal to go to present-day Brazil, which was a huge colony of Portugal in South America. So this was during the time of the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition. Historically, Spain wanted all foreign peoples, non-Catholic, to leave their countries, Spain and Portugal. So at the time, there was a large Jewish population there. There was a large Islamic population there, and there was a large Roma, pejoratively known as gypsy populations in both countries, who were non-Christian. So the options were convert to Christianity, you can stay, but we're going to keep an eye on you. You can leave, or you can stay and we'll kill you. So, not very many options, really. Now, because Brazil was under the control of Portugal, the Inquisition took place there as well. So her family leaves Brazil and ends up in uh, New Amsterdam, part of our New Netherlands geographic area. So the immigration of Jewish refugees from around the world had started very early in what's known today as New York City, even back to the 1600s. So Emma Lazarus' ancestors were part of that early group. She grows up, well educated, makes her money writing. She becomes a philanthropist in a way. She's as more and more Jewish refugees from around the world come to New York, in their borough, in their neighborhood. She would go and she would set up um, vocational training programs so that these newly arrived immigrants would have job skills, so that they could get the jobs that were available at the time here in America. And most of those were kind of factory labor jobs. But she played an important part in getting the local Jewish refugee population into the workforce. Now, one of her poems becomes famous. It's called the NICHOLASA. Again, uh, very much connected to classic literature, which was still part of the literature of the day, reciting or mentioning the mythology of the past. And this poem becomes the plaque that is on the base of the Statue of Liberty. And the poem, I'm not going to do this justice, but I'll give it a whirl. There is a nice video attached to the assignment that really shows how the immigration of peoples from around the world passing through a place called Ellis Island, this is where all your documents had to be looked at, and you get the stamp so that you can enter into the country. Okay, so the poem, The New Colossus. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles, from her beacon hand, glows worldwide welcome, her mild eyes command. The air-bridged harbor, that twin cities' fame. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp, she cries. With silent lips, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest toasts to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Okay, so this is the ideal of American immigration. Parts of her poem have been used in countless speeches by countless politicians from the time that it was written, stating and acclaiming the American ideal. Give us your poor, your humble, your huddled masses, come here to the land of the free. And this was written by Emma Lazarus. Okay, so that's kind of the conclusion of our video for today. A couple things to keep in mind. Again, on our West Side Story script reading, just choose 10 pages. There are a couple of other short readings, a review of the theatrical production, West Side Story, a quick news article on a new revised edition of the theatrical production slated for 2020. See how that goes with the way things are right now. That might be postponed for a while. But I'd like you to start to think about our end assignment, the research paper. So let me say a few words about that. And if you could send along 3 topics that you'd like to choose from for your research paper. Can you change your mind later? Sure. But it's time to really start to think about our 3 topics that we're going to write about. Now, again, if you wish, I can send you a list of topics, but really, it's really up to you. Was there anything that you found that you really liked within the course? An author, a piece of writing, a genre that we've talked about, or will be talking about, that you'd like to explore further and do some further research on. Now, what I tell my students is, don't just write a research paper for the exercise of writing the research paper. Make it connect to you somehow, some way. Make it valid. Okay. Now, as an example, let's say you had another course that you were taking that parallels this course. Maybe you're taking a, let's say, Native American Indian history course. Okay. Is there a way to kind of kill two birds with one stone? That's an option. Okay. So try to think of 3 topics, anything to do with American literature. Up to you. But make it relevant to you, make it of interest to you. Don't just write the research paper for the sake of writing the research paper. Now, just come up with 3 topics. Again, you can change your mind later. Within your email on your reflection of this week, give me 3 topics that you think you'd like to research further. Okay, so the next week's lesson is going to be off menu as well. We get more into the arts and some of the quirky things that are about New York City. We've kind of looked at the darker side of literature in our stories, so we're going to lighten it up and take a look at more avant-garde, artsy types of things. And following that will be the consultation week. So we really need to finish up the Abundance of Catherine's reading, and I've sent you several options for a project for that, and that's what's going to happen coming up in the next 2 weeks. Okay, so that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks. Goodbye.